The most painful words are often spoken by someone who thinks you will never hear them. I learned that on a Tuesday evening in early October. The sun had already disappeared behind the rows of houses across our neighborhood in Plano, Texas. A cool breeze moved through the trees while I sat in my truck at the end of the driveway, staring at the dark windows of my own home. I had just finished another 12-hour day. My shoulders ached. My head hurt. And all I wanted was a hot meal and 30 minutes of silence before going to bed and doing it all again tomorrow. For the past 3 years, my life had become a routine of responsibilities. Work, bills, family obligations, more work. I knew I was not the easiest husband to live with anymore. I came home tired. I forgot anniversaries. I missed dinners. Some nights I barely had enough energy to hold a conversation. But I believe Lauren understood why. At least, I thought she did. As I stepped out of the truck, I noticed light coming from the kitchen window. Lauren had company. Through the glass, I could see her sitting at the table with her friend Melissa. I smiled slightly. Good. Lauren needed people to talk to. I had not been giving her enough attention lately. I walked toward the front door, but before reaching it, I heard their voices through the partially open kitchen window. I was not trying to eavesdrop. I was simply close enough to hear. Then Lauren said something that stopped me cold. Every day with him feels like regret. For a second, I thought I misunderstood. I stood motionless beside the porch. The evening air suddenly felt much colder. Melissa said something I could not hear. Lauren answered immediately. Honestly, I wish I could end this nightmare and start over. The words hit harder than I can describe. Not because they were shouted. Not because they were cruel. Because they sounded sincere. There was no anger in her voice. No argument. No emotional outburst. Just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from believing something for a very long time. I remained outside, unable to move. My heart felt strangely heavy. 12 years of marriage passed through my mind in fragments. Our wedding day. Buying our first house. Bringing our daughter Emily home from the hospital. Family vacations. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Were all of those memories standing on one side of a scale while regret sat on the other? Melissa spoke again. This time I heard her clearly. Have you told him how unhappy you are? Lauren laughed softly. The sound hurt more than the words. What would be the point? He barely notices anything anymore. I lowered my eyes toward the concrete beneath my feet. Maybe from her perspective, that was true. Lately, I had become distracted, distant, quiet. There were reasons for that. Important reasons. But none of them were things I could explain. Not yet. The conversation continued. Lauren talked about feeling alone. About canceled plans. About evenings spent waiting for me to come home. About promises that never seemed to happen. With every sentence, I realized how different our marriage looked from her side. The strangest part was that she was not inventing anything. Those things had happened. I had missed dinners. I had worked weekends. I had become emotionally unavailable. The facts were real. What she did not know was why. Eventually, I heard chairs move. Panic snapped me back to reality. I quietly stepped away from the window and walked around the side of the house before either woman could see me. A few minutes later, I entered through the front door like nothing had happened. Lauren greeted me with a tired smile. I returned it. We spoke about ordinary things. Emily's school schedule. A package that arrived earlier. What we needed from the grocery store. The entire time, I kept hearing those words in my head. I wish I could end this nightmare. That night, long after everyone else was asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring into darkness. For the first time in years, I found myself wondering whether the woman I loved had already given up on us. And if she had, I wondered what would happen when she finally discovered the truth I had been hiding. The next morning, I woke up after barely sleeping. The conversation I overheard kept replaying in my mind like a song I could not turn off. Lauren moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast, while Emily checked her phone before school. Everything looked normal. That was the strange part. The most painful moments in a marriage are rarely dramatic. Sometimes they hide behind ordinary mornings and polite conversations. Lauren asked if I wanted coffee. I thanked her and said yes. Emily told us about an upcoming school project. We nodded, smiled, and acted like a family. Yet underneath that routine, something had shifted. For the first time, I found myself wondering how long Lauren had been carrying those feelings. Days, months, years. After breakfast, I drove Emily to school. The autumn air felt cooler than usual. As we sat at a red light, she glanced at me. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask that? I said. She shrugged. You just seem tired lately. I smiled. Work has been busy. She nodded, but I could tell she was not completely convinced. Teenagers notice more than adults realize. After dropping her off, I headed downtown to the engineering firm where I worked. The office occupied 3 floors of a glass building overlooking a busy highway. I spent most of the morning reviewing project reports and attending meetings, but my concentration kept slipping. Around lunchtime, I received a text message from Lauren. It simply said, "Do not forget dinner with the Petersons on Friday." 5 years ago, I would have answered immediately. Now nearly 20 minutes passed before I replied. The truth was that I had forgotten. Not because I did not care, because my mind was constantly occupied by things I could not discuss. That evening, I arrived home later than expected. The driveway was already dark. Lauren sat in the living room watching television while Emily worked on homework at the dining table. The moment I walked through the door, I noticed Lauren checking the clock. She did not say anything, but the message was clear. "You are late again." During dinner, the conversation felt strained. Lauren talked about a neighborhood event happening the following weekend. I vaguely remembered her mentioning it before. "You are still coming, right?" she asked. I hesitated. Just long enough. Her expression changed immediately. "You forgot, did you not?" she asked. I opened my mouth to explain, but there was nothing I could say without revealing things I was not ready to reveal. "I have a lot going on right now," I said carefully. Lauren laughed softly and shook her head. It was not an angry laugh. Somehow that made it worse. "You always have a lot going on." The room fell silent. Emily focused on her plate. I stared at my food. Lauren stood up and carried her dishes to the sink. The disappointment in her voice stayed with me long after dinner ended. Later that night, I sat alone on the back patio. The neighborhood was quiet. Porch lights glowed across nearby yards. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I thought about everything Lauren had said to Melissa. If someone looked at our marriage from the outside, I understood why they might agree with her. I missed events. I canceled plans. I seemed emotionally distant. I was absent more often than present. The evidence was all there. The problem was that evidence does not always tell the whole story. Around 10 o'clock, my phone vibrated. A message appeared on the screen. It was not from work. It was not from a friend. It was from someone whose name Lauren had never seen before. The message contained only 4 words. "Appointment confirmed for tomorrow." I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone and slipping it back into my pocket. Because while Lauren believed she understood exactly why our marriage was falling apart, she had absolutely no idea where I was going the next morning. The next morning, I left the house before sunrise. The sky above Plano was still dark, and most of the neighborhood remained asleep. Lauren barely stirred when I got out of bed. Emily's bedroom door stayed closed. For a moment, I stood in the hallway listening to the silence of my own home. Then I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door. The appointment was scheduled for 7:30. I arrived 15 minutes early. The building sat on the edge of Dallas, tucked between several medical offices and professional suites. It looked ordinary from the outside. Clean brick walls, small landscaped walkways. Nothing about it would attract attention. That was exactly why I chose it. I parked near the back and sat inside my truck for a moment. My hands rested on the steering wheel while I watched people enter the building. Some looked nervous. Others looked exhausted. A few appeared hopeful. I understood all 3 emotions. Eventually, my phone buzzed. A reminder notification confirmed the appointment. I took a deep breath and headed inside. The receptionist greeted me by name. She had seen me enough times to recognize me immediately. After checking in, I sat in the waiting room beneath soft lighting and quiet music. A television mounted on the wall played a morning news program with the volume turned low. No one spoke much. Everyone seemed lost inside their own thoughts. 20 minutes later, a familiar voice called my name. I stood and followed Dr. Margaret Collins down a hallway lined with framed photographs and certificates. She had become one of the few people who knew what my life really looked like. Unlike Lauren, she understood where my evenings disappeared. She understood why I worked so many extra hours. She understood why I constantly looked tired. Inside her office, she reviewed several reports before looking up at me. "How are things at home?" she asked gently. I hesitated. Then I laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, because the truth felt complicated. "Not great," I admitted. She nodded as if that answer did not surprise her. We spent nearly 40 minutes discussing schedules, treatment plans, financial arrangements, and upcoming appointments. Every topic carried weight. Every decision carried consequences. By the time the meeting ended, my head felt heavier than when I arrived. As I walked back through the parking lot, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Daniel Reed, one of the few friends I still saw regularly. We met for lunch near my office. Daniel listened while I described some of the stress I had been carrying. I did not share everything. Certain promises prevented that, but he understood enough. At one point, he leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "You know," he said, "most people would ask for help." I smiled. "Most people are smarter than me." He shook his head. "No, most people eventually break." His words followed me long after lunch ended. Later that evening, I arrived home just before 6. Lauren was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Emily sat nearby working on school assignments. Everything looked peaceful, yet something felt different. Lauren barely looked up when I entered. Her disappointment no longer came out as frustration. It had settled into distance. Somehow that worried me more. During dinner, Emily told us about a presentation she would be giving the following week. Lauren listened carefully and asked questions. I listened too, but my attention drifted several times. Emily noticed immediately. "Dad," she said, "you missed half of what I just said." I apologized. Lauren lowered her fork and stared at me. The expression on her face was not anger. It was resignation, as if she expected nothing else. Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room reviewing paperwork I kept hidden inside a locked briefcase. Medical statements, payment confirmations, legal documents, schedules. Numbers covered nearly every page. Numbers that explained where my time went. Numbers that explained why I worked so much. Numbers that explained why my savings account looked different than Lauren believed. Suddenly, headlights flashed through the front window. A car pulled into the driveway. Confused, I checked the clock. It was nearly 10 o'clock. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang. When I opened the front door, I froze. Standing on the porch was someone connected to the secret I had been protecting for years. And if Lauren happened to come downstairs and see who was waiting outside, everything could change much sooner than I planned. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The man standing on my porch was Robert's attorney, Thomas Bennett. Most people would have assumed he was simply a lawyer making a late visit. The problem was that his appearance at my house created questions I could not answer without revealing secrets I had spent years protecting. "Thomas," I said quietly, "what are you doing here?" His expression immediately told me something was wrong. "I tried calling," he said, "several times." I looked down and realized my phone had been on silent ever since dinner. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He hesitated. "Not exactly." Before he could continue, I heard movement behind me. My stomach tightened. Lauren was coming downstairs. She appeared at the end of the hallway wearing a light sweater and looking confused. Her eyes moved from me to the stranger standing outside. "Who is that?" she asked. Every answer I considered felt dangerous. Thomas quickly extended his hand. "Thomas Bennett," he said politely. "I apologize for the late visit." Lauren nodded but continued studying him. I could see questions forming immediately. She had spent years watching me disappear at odd hours, miss family events, and guard parts of my schedule. Now a stranger was standing on our porch at 10 o'clock at night. Nothing about the situation looked normal. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Thomas glanced toward me. I knew he was waiting for permission. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. Lauren noticed the exchange. Her expression hardened slightly. Not angry, suspicious. "Privately about what?" she asked. The silence that followed felt longer than it actually was. Finally, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The cool night air hit my face immediately. "What happened?" I asked. Thomas lowered his voice. "Your father's condition has changed." My chest tightened. Even after all these years, hearing those words never got easier. My father, Robert Foster, had been battling serious health problems for a long time. Most people knew he was retired. Very few understood the extent of his medical situation. Even fewer understood how much it cost to keep everything stable. "How bad?" I asked. Thomas handed me a folder. "The specialists want to begin another treatment plan." I opened the file and scanned several pages beneath the porch light. Numbers stared back at me. More appointments. More procedures. More expenses. My father deserved every chance available. I never questioned that. But every new phase required additional sacrifices. Thomas studied my face. "I know you have already done more than anyone expected." I shook my head. "He is my father. You cannot carry everything forever, he replied quietly. The irony almost made me laugh, because carrying everything had become my specialty. Work, bills, family, medical costs, responsibilities layered on top of each other until I barely recognized my own life anymore. After Thomas left, I remained outside for several minutes staring at the empty street. Porch lights glowed across neighboring houses. Somewhere nearby, a television flickered through a window. Ordinary families lived ordinary lives. I wondered what that felt like now. Eventually, I went back inside. Lauren was waiting in the kitchen. She had not gone upstairs. Her arms were crossed. The folder remained hidden beneath my jacket. Who was he, she asked. I prepared the same answer I had used many times before. A partial truth. Just enough information to avoid a complete lie. Someone helping with a family matter, I said. Her eyes narrowed. What family matter? There it was again. The growing distance between us. The frustration. The suspicion. Every secret I kept pushed us farther apart. Yet revealing the truth would break promises I had made years ago. Lauren looked away and shook her head. I do not even know you anymore. The words hurt because part of me understood why she felt that way. She turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs. I stood alone in darkness listening to her footsteps disappear. Then I pulled the folder back out and looked at the updated treatment schedule. The next appointment was only 3 days away. And if I could not find a way to manage everything, the secret I had been protecting was about to become impossible to hide. 3 days later, everything began to unravel. Not because I decided to tell the truth, because life stopped giving me the option to keep hiding it. The morning started like any other. I left the house before sunrise and drove to Dallas for my father's appointment. The visit lasted longer than expected. By the time I finished speaking with doctors, reviewing treatment schedules, and handling paperwork, half the day was gone. I checked my phone and saw 2 missed calls from work, 1 message from Daniel, and a text from Lauren asking if I would be home for dinner. I typed a quick response promising I would try. Even as I sent it, I knew there was a good chance I would be late again. Around 4 o'clock, I stopped by a financial office to finalize several payments connected to my father's care. The numbers were substantial. They always were. Years earlier, I had made a promise to myself that he would never have to worry about money while fighting for his health. Keeping that promise required sacrifices nobody in my family fully understood. By the time I finally headed home, traffic stretched across the highway in every direction. Red brake lights filled the evening. I arrived nearly an hour later than planned. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I sensed something was wrong. Lauren's car was there. Emily's car was there. Yet the house felt unusually quiet. When I stepped inside, neither of them greeted me. The silence immediately put me on edge. Then I saw Lauren standing in the living room. Her face looked pale. In her hands was a thick folder. My stomach dropped instantly. I recognized it before she even spoke. Somehow she had found the documents. Medical records, payment receipts, treatment schedules, legal agreements. Everything I had spent years keeping private sat in her hands. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Emily stood near the hallway looking equally confused. Lauren slowly raised one of the pages. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but I could hear emotion underneath it. I closed the front door behind me. "Where did you find that?" I asked quietly. "You left your briefcase unlocked." The words felt like a punch to the chest. I almost never made mistakes like that. Yet sometime during the previous night, exhaustion must have caught up with me. Lauren looked down at the papers again. "These payments go back years, Caleb." I remained silent. "Thousands of dollars." Another silence. "Actually, much more than that." Emily looked between us. "Dad, what is she talking about?" I sat down slowly. There was no point avoiding the conversation anymore. The secret was already out. Lauren stepped closer and placed several documents on the coffee table. Hospital records, specialist appointments, financial transfers, insurance statements. "Why would you hide all of this?" Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. What struck me most was not anger. It was confusion. Genuine confusion. The kind that appears when someone realizes reality does not match the story they have been telling themselves. I rubbed my hands together and stared at the floor. For years I had imagined this moment. I imagined arguments, accusations, tears. Instead, the room felt strangely still. Emily picked up one of the documents and read a few lines. Then her eyes widened. "Grandpa," she whispered. I nodded. Lauren looked at me as if seeing a stranger. All those late nights, she said softly. The extra jobs. The weekends. The appointments. Piece by piece, connections began forming in her mind. I could see it happening. Every assumption she made over the years was colliding with evidence she never knew existed. Then she found one final document buried near the bottom of the stack. Her eyes scanned the page. Suddenly, she stopped breathing for a second. "You sold your retirement investments?" she asked quietly. I did not answer. I did not need to. The document answered for me. Lauren lowered the paper slowly. The room became completely silent. Because at that moment, she realized something that neither of us could ignore anymore. The man she believed had stopped caring about his family had actually been sacrificing everything for them. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The documents remained scattered across the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle that had finally fallen into place. Lauren sat down slowly, her eyes moving from one page to another. Emily stood beside her, reading portions of records neither of them had ever seen before. I remained in the chair across from them, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. Years of explanations I never gave were suddenly sitting in plain sight. Eventually, Lauren looked up. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked. The question sounded sincere, not accusatory, not defensive, just confused. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "Because Dad asked me not to." Lauren blinked. "Asked you not to?" I nodded. "When his condition became worse, he made me promise. He did not want anyone worrying about him. He did not want Emily distracted. He definitely did not want you feeling responsible." Emily lowered her eyes. Lauren looked as though she wanted to say something, but could not find the words. I continued. "At first, I thought I could manage everything without anyone noticing. Then the appointments increased. The bills increased. The treatments became more complicated. Every time I planned to explain it, another problem appeared." Lauren picked up one of the payment records. "You paid all of this yourself?" I nodded again. "Most of it." Her eyes widened slightly. "Caleb, this is years of savings." I laughed quietly. "I know." The room fell silent again. For so long, Lauren had viewed my absence as indifference, my exhaustion as emotional distance, my distractions as lack of interest. Now every assumption was colliding with reality. Emily sat beside her mother and began flipping through additional documents. Then she stopped at a photograph. "Grandpa never told me any of this," she whispered. "He did not want you to know," I said. "He wanted you focused on being a teenager instead of worrying about hospitals." Emily looked down at the picture for several seconds before carefully placing it back on the table. Lauren suddenly stood and walked toward the kitchen. I heard a cabinet open, then another. A moment later, she returned carrying a small box. She placed it in front of me. At first, I did not recognize it. Then I realized what it was. Inside were dozens of ticket stubs, invitation cards, and photographs from events I had missed over the years. School performances, neighborhood gatherings, family outings. Lauren opened the box and looked directly at me. "These are all the moments I thought you chose not to attend." Her voice trembled slightly. "Every single one." I stared at the contents without speaking. She was right. I had missed them. The reasons suddenly felt less important than the consequences. "I know," I said quietly. Lauren shook her head. "No, I do not think you do." Tears filled her eyes for the first time. "I convinced myself you stopped caring." The words hung in the room. Every time you missed something, it became easier to believe. Every late night, every canceled plan, every excuse. She looked down at the medical records. I never even considered there might be another explanation. I did not know what to say, because the truth was uncomfortable for both of us. She had judged me unfairly, but I had also shut her out. Secrets have consequences even when they are kept for good reasons. The clock on the wall ticked softly while nobody spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "So what happens now?" she asked. It was the simplest question anyone had asked all evening. Yet none of us had an answer. Lauren looked at me. I looked back at her. For the first time in years, there was no anger in her eyes. No disappointment. No resentment. Only uncertainty. And somehow uncertainty felt more frightening than conflict. Then my phone vibrated on the coffee table. A message appeared from Dr. Collins. I opened it and immediately felt my stomach tighten. The update was brief, but it changed everything. My father's condition had taken an unexpected turn overnight. And by the time I looked up from the screen, I knew the next 24 hours were about to test our family in ways none of us were prepared for. We left for the hospital before sunrise. The drive from Plano to Dallas felt strangely different from every other trip I had made over the past few years. For the first time, I was not carrying the burden alone. Lauren sat beside me in silence while Emily occupied the back seat. No one knew exactly what to say. The discoveries from the previous evening still hung over us. Yet beneath the uncertainty, something had changed. The distance that once separated us no longer felt quite as wide. When we arrived, Dr. Collins met us near the cardiac wing. Her expression was professional but concerned. She explained that my father's condition had become more complicated overnight and that the medical team wanted to monitor him closely for the next several days. None of the news was catastrophic, but it was serious enough to require immediate attention. After speaking with the doctors, we entered his room together. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Age and illness have a way of quietly stealing pieces of a person. Yet when he saw Emily, a smile immediately appeared on his face. "There is my favorite granddaughter," he said. Emily laughed softly and walked over to hug him. Watching them together reminded me why I had made so many sacrifices in the first place. Some things are simply more important than convenience. Throughout the morning, Lauren remained unusually quiet. She listened to conversations with doctors. She reviewed schedules. She observed details she had never been allowed to see before. Every hour seemed to reveal another piece of the life I had been living in secret. At one point, she stepped into the hallway with me while Emily stayed inside the room with her grandfather. "How long have you been doing all of this?" she asked. I already knew what she meant. "Almost 4 years," I answered. Her eyes widened. Even after discovering the documents, hearing the number aloud seemed to affect her differently. "For years," she repeated quietly. Then she looked down the hallway. "And I spent all that time thinking you were pulling away from us." I did not respond immediately, because the truth was complicated. "You were not completely wrong," I finally said. "I was pulling away. I just thought I was protecting everyone by doing it." Lauren nodded slowly. There was sadness in her expression now, but also understanding. Later that afternoon, while my father slept, Lauren and Emily went to the hospital cafeteria. I remained alone in the room. The steady sound of medical equipment filled the silence. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. My father opened his eyes and looked at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled faintly. "She knows now, does she not?" he asked. I almost laughed. Even after everything, he somehow knew. "Yes," I said. "She found out." He nodded as though he had expected it. And I thought about that question carefully. "I do not know yet." My father looked toward the window. "Secrets always cost something, son. Even the good ones." Those words stayed with me, because deep down, I knew he was right. Keeping the truth hidden protected my family from worry, but it also created misunderstandings that nearly destroyed my marriage. By evening, we returned home exhausted. Lauren spent most of the drive staring out the window. Emily eventually fell asleep in the back seat. When we pulled into the driveway, Lauren remained seated for a moment before turning toward me. "There is something I need to tell you," she said quietly. Her voice carried a seriousness that immediately caught my attention. Then she reached into her purse and removed a business card. I recognized the name printed on it instantly. It belonged to a divorce attorney. And judging by the expression on Lauren's face, she was about to tell me something that would change everything once again. For a second, I could not understand why Lauren was holding the card. The name of the attorney was familiar because I had seen advertisements for his firm around town. Yet seeing it in her hand after everything that happened that day created a knot in my stomach. Lauren looked down at the card and then back at me. "I met with him 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I was shocked. Part of me had sensed we were moving toward that point for a long time. Still, hearing it spoken aloud felt different. Real. Final. We sat in the parked car while Emily slept in the back seat. The dashboard lights cast a soft glow across Lauren's face. For the first time in years, there was no frustration in her expression, only regret. "I was ready to leave," she admitted. I had already started asking questions about the process. I looked through the windshield at our dark house. "Why are you telling me this now?" Lauren took a slow breath. "Because after everything I learned, I could not keep pretending I understood what was happening." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence felt honest. Painful, but honest. Eventually, we went inside. Emily headed upstairs while Lauren remained in the kitchen. I poured 2 cups of coffee, even though it was late. Somehow it felt like the kind of conversation that required coffee. We sat across from each other at the same table where so many misunderstandings had quietly grown over the years. Lauren pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. It was a list. At first I did not recognize it. Then she slid it toward me. These were the reasons I wrote down for wanting to leave. I stared at the page. Every line represented a disappointment. Never home. Always distracted. Missed family events. Emotionally distant. Forgotten promises. Poor communication. I could not argue with any of it. Every complaint was based on something real. Lauren watched me carefully. The problem is that I built an entire story around those facts. Her voice trembled slightly. I decided I knew why you were doing those things. She looked away for a moment. And I was wrong. The words seemed difficult for her to say. I folded the paper and placed it back on the table. You were not wrong about everything, I said. I should have handled things differently too. Lauren shook her head. Maybe, but I stopped giving you the benefit of the doubt a long time ago. That sentence stayed with me. Because trust rarely disappears all at once. It erodes quietly through assumptions, disappointments, and unanswered questions. We talked for nearly 2 hours. More honestly than we had spoken in years. Lauren told me about the loneliness she felt. I told her about the pressure I carried. She explained how abandoned she felt whenever I missed another event. I explained why every missed event haunted me afterward. Somewhere during that conversation, the anger that had lived between us began to dissolve. Not because our problems vanished. Because we finally stopped defending ourselves long enough to listen. Around midnight, Lauren stood and walked toward the hallway. Then she stopped. There is something else, she said. I looked up. What? She hesitated. After I found the documents, I spent hours looking through old photographs. A sad smile appeared on her face. You know what I realized? I shook my head. Every picture where I thought you looked distant, exhausted, or distracted happened during the exact years you were carrying all of this alone. I did not know how to respond. Lauren wiped at her eyes and laughed softly. It is amazing how differently memories look once you know the whole story. After she went upstairs, I remained at the table staring into my coffee. The house was quiet. For the first time in years, it felt peaceful. Not fixed, not healed, but peaceful. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Dr. Collins appeared on the screen. I opened it immediately. The update was encouraging. My father's condition had stabilized. Relief washed over me. But before I could fully process the news, another message arrived from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. If you truly want to save your family, there is something you still do not know. I stared at the message for several seconds. The number was unfamiliar. No name. No explanation. Just a single sentence that seemed designed to pull me back into uncertainty. Under different circumstances, I might have ignored it. But after everything that had happened, curiosity won. I replied with a simple question asking who it was. No answer came that night. Eventually, I locked my phone and headed upstairs. For the first time in years, I slept without feeling completely alone. The next morning brought something I had almost forgotten how to recognize. Peace. It was not dramatic. It was not perfect. But when I walked into the kitchen, Lauren was already making breakfast. Emily sat at the counter finishing homework. The tension that had dominated our home for so long seemed quieter, more distant. Lauren looked up and smiled. It was a small smile, but it felt genuine. Over the following week, life began moving in a different direction. My father's condition stabilized enough for him to return home under careful supervision. Emily started visiting him regularly. Lauren joined her whenever she could. Watching them spend time together reminded me how much had been lost through years of misunderstanding. One afternoon, while helping my father organize old paperwork, I finally received a reply from the unknown number. The message was surprisingly simple. It came from an administrative assistant connected to one of my father's former financial advisors. She explained that several documents needed my signature because my father had quietly arranged educational funds for Emily years earlier. I laughed when I finished reading. After all the suspense, the mystery turned out to be one final act of generosity from a man who spent his life thinking about his family. A few days later, Lauren and I sat together on the back porch after sunset. The air was cool. The neighborhood was quiet. We watched lights appear in nearby homes as evening settled across the street. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Lauren broke the silence. "Do you know what bothers me the most?" she asked. I shook my head. She stared into the darkness beyond the yard. I spent so much time focusing on what was missing that I stopped seeing what was there. I understood exactly what she meant. Because I had made a similar mistake. I became so focused on protecting everyone that I stopped letting them stand beside me. We talked for hours that night. About marriage. About trust. About assumptions. About the years we could not get back. There were no miracles. No magical moment where every problem disappeared. Real life rarely works that way. What happened instead was something better. Honesty returned. Patience returned. Understanding returned. And little by little, those things began rebuilding what had nearly been lost. Several months later, Emily gave a presentation at school. I sat in the front row beside Lauren. When Emily spotted us together, her smile lit up the room. It was a simple moment. Most people would have forgotten it by the end of the day. I never did. Because there was a time when I almost missed it. There was a time when my family was standing on the edge of falling apart. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I had learned sooner. People rarely see the entire story. We see pieces, fragments, moments. Then we fill the gaps with assumptions. Sometimes those assumptions are wrong. Sometimes they cost us relationships that matter most. If my journey taught me anything, it is that understanding should come before judgment, and conversations should come before conclusions. As for Lauren and me, our future was not built on perfection. It was built on finally learning the truth about each other. And that made all the difference. Before this story ends, I would love to know your thoughts. If you were in Lauren's position, would you have reacted differently once the truth was revealed? And if you were in mine, would you have kept the secret for so many years? Stories like this remind us how complicated life and relationships can be. If you enjoy thoughtful stories about family, trust, forgiveness, and second chances, I hope you will stay with us for more journeys ahead, because sometimes the next story contains the lesson we need most.